Okay. So I'm going to talk about this proposal of a fiscal currency, which is a sort of a plan B. So it could be seen as the natural progress over the last session. And I will briefly follow this outline. So the reasons for a fiscal currency, what is a fiscal currency, which is a rather mysterious object, and what can we do with a fiscal currency and how it may work and whether it may or may not succeed. So I have this slide to begin with, which starts with the very basics of what money is and also the emphasis on trust that Brigitte was just remembering. And I think I actually should spend a long time on discussing money, but this was not my target today. But what has emerged in a number of talks early in the morning and later is this idea based on old textbooks where saving is a given, so that if there is too much public debt, too much public borrowing, we are taking out the saving which would otherwise be available for private investment. Now, this is not really the case. We now know, and central banks are more and more writing it out in these terms, that money is created out of nothing whenever it is profitable to do so. So the argument should be, is it profitable to create money to fund a profitable investment? Why are we not doing this? And this would, I think, change quite dramatically the line of the argument. And as one of my mentors, Augusto Graziani, taught me, what matters really is not money, but the availability of idle resources to increase output, employment, and well-being. As Keynes famously said, when interrogated on the possibility of building a subway, he said, do we have enough materials? Do we have enough unemployed persons with the right skills? If the answer is yes, then where do we take the money from is irrelevant. We will find the funding. And I think that this should be the perspective that we take. And if we are discussing a fiscal currency today, is because of the flaws of the Eurozone architecture, which has put some countries, notably Greece, in deep distress because money was no longer available when it was needed. Now, if we want to overcome some of these faults through the creation of a new currency, then the trust in the new currency is key. And modern money theory, MMT, stresses that the ability to pay taxes with the currency is crucial for people to trust the currency. If they know that all the levels of government will accept this means of payment for tax payment, why shouldn't they accept it also for other ways? So the idea and the debate on a fiscal currency came out with the Greek crisis, and I think that should the ECB had broken the rule when Papandreou came to the government and declared that Greece was in deep trouble, should the ECB had said, okay, we will be the lender of last resort for the Greek government, then we will not be here, we will not have had this kind of long recessions. So this didn't happen, and Greek banks started to be in trouble. As Greece went into austerity, firms and households went into trouble, non-performing loans increased, credit was frozen, and so on. So several commentators started to propose an alternative means of payment, not necessarily a fiscal currency, but a parallel currency. I've checked that very few other academic papers quote the literature after 2015. So this was a kind of a window opportunity for Greece, which closed rather quickly for reasons that we can discuss. And there is a nice paper by Schuster which summarizes more than 30 proposals of how a parallel currency may work. I'm not going to discuss all of them. I've just listed all the different options that you can choose. Obviously, you want the currency to help the recovery and to provide liquidity. But how should this currency work? Should it be issued by the central bank, by the treasury, by private banks, issued as a government IOU, or given out by loans, and so on and so forth? Should it be convertible? Should it have its own market price against the euro so that it can be devalued or appreciated? Should we convert all contracts into the new fiscal currency or not? Should it be temporary, or should it be permanent and become the new domestic currency? And in some radical way, should it change the way money is being created? In Greece, Varoufakis had two proposals, and I hope that Glenn will give us some details. What I've learned from public information that his proposal before becoming minister was a sort of a fiscal currency as a tax discount. So the government, and he actually thought of the governments in the Eurozone, could sell a tax certificate worth 1,000 euro at a price which was lower than 1,000 euros, so that the buyer would get a discount. And in this way, you substitute euro liquidity in the market with this new fiscal currency, but you're not increasing the liquidity in circulation. So it was just a way for a government in desperate need of euro liquidity to raise such liquidity. When he was a minister, he instead was talking of a fiscal currency as a parallel payment system. There are some remarks which have come out that he thought to use the tax system network to create a new circuit for payments, but we all know that it didn't work out. In his recent excellent book, Adults in the Room, he gives some information on this, which is directly linked to what was being discussed earlier on the need to provide a credible threat when you want to propose a policy which is against those favored by the European Commission and the ECB. I will instead focus on two proposals which have been studied a little more for Italy. And these two proposals share some technical aspects and diverge on some other technical details, and they can, I think, all be proposed in a complementary way rather than as an alternative. I am not very keen on adopting one particular technicality for a fiscal currency. I'm more interested in what the country is able to do with additional liquidity. But both proposals would not be legal tenders, so the government would never issue any law suggesting that private individuals have to use them for private contracts. But they will be used as tax payments, so the government will accept them in tax payment, but they will not be convertible in the sense that the government is not willing to exchange them directly against euro. Otherwise, they would be exactly the same as euro banknotes or euro digital currency, and it would be back to square one. So the first of these two proposals is better known and is called in Italian certificati di credito fiscale, or tax credit certificates. And the idea is that the Treasury issues these certificates which have a nominal value at maturity after 2 years and uses them for a number of payments that I will discuss later. So they are similar to a bond because we expect their market price today to be lower than their nominal value at maturity. The key question is, what is going to be their market value today? If they are perceived by the market as a bond, they should bear a small premium. But if they are considered to be worse than a bond, their market price may be lower. So the impact they will have will work through the fiscal multiplier that I will discuss in a few minutes. The longer they will circulate before being redeemed for tax payments, the larger the impact on stimulating demand that can be expected. So proponents are Bossone, Cattaneo, Costa, Silos, Labini, and others. And the pro of this proposal is that there is no impact on the deficit of the government. There has been an investigation on whether this would be considered as part of Italian public debt, and the answer is negative. They would not increase the debt as far as the treaties are concerned. And whether they will create a deficit 2 years into the future is a matter of the multiplier. If the multiplier is large enough, the deficit may not be increased. The proponents claim that this is the case. I wish it were the case, because if our multiplier were so large, an additional expenditure today will be paid back with more after 2 years, and we would not need the fiscal currency anyway, provided that we can sustain a temporary deficit. So I think that there will be a small impact on the deficit 2 years from now, but much smaller than what you get with a traditional fiscal policy paid for in euro. The other proposal is similar, but instead of presuming that this certificate will be spent for taxes 2 years from now, the idea is that the recipient can spend it immediately, but up to a threshold of its tax obligation, say 30%. So this can be issued in a digital network or maybe even on banknotes, but banknotes take a long time to be produced and circulated. So the idea is that the government can spend this immediately, the recipient can spend a part of it immediately in tax payment, and the other will circulate. So the pro of the proposal against the other one is that there is no discount, since I can spend immediately these 100 euro lira or euro IT currency. Why should I trade it for less than 100 euro? The con is that it may, and actually it is expected to temporarily increase government deficit. So what can be done with the fiscal currency? And what can be done will depend on the policies of the government. The general rule should be mobilize idle domestic resources. So unemployment is high. We need to create jobs. There is unused capacity. We have to put capacity back to use. And if this is due to a lack of aggregate demand, then the fiscal currency is one way to address the problem. So it can be used to create job directly by giving the unemployed a job, by financing public investment, which could be financed in part in euro, in part in the fiscal currency. It can be used to increase the minimum income or the minimum wage or given social groups. It can be used to support exporting firms by reducing their tax burden, and in this way it would achieve a similar impact of a reduction in unit labor cost when competitiveness, price competitiveness is an issue. And finally, it can be used to make financial assets and liabilities more liquid. So just to give an example, my university has discovered a huge debt with the Italian pension system, but it also has large credit against other local government authorities, but it cannot compensate the two. And I believe there are many public local authorities in a similar situation. So an additional finance in this fiscal currency to local governments and local authorities could help clear up the balance sheet and avoid the austerity measures which are being implemented also at the local level. How much of this fiscal currency should be created? So there are two limits. The first limit is that basically this is all because we have a currency, the euro, which is outside our control, and we have a debt denominated in euro that we want to pay back eventually in the future, and on which we want to pay interest. So since the amount of euro liquidity which comes in net, just to simplify things, in Italy depends on the current account balance and also on financial transactions, but let's focus on the current account balance. We know that if we make an expansionary fiscal policy and people will have money in their pockets, they will spend more on imports, and this will deteriorate our current account balance and reduce the amount of liquidity getting in. So the foreign constraint is the first constraint that must be taken care of. And the second constraint is the productive capacity. As the economy approaches full capacity and the unemployment rate drops, additional fiscal stimulus will be inflationary, but we are at present quite far from both of these constraints to be binding. So 100,000, 100 billion euro equivalent of stimulus should not go against these two constraints, and there is no reason to have a fiscal stimulus of 100 billion euro immediately. A government willing to adopt this policy could start with a much lower stimulus and see to fine-tune what happens later. How will the demand for this fiscal currency work? Well, obviously, if the euro is still the legal tender, nobody wants to be paid in anything other than euro. But I get an increasing number of reports that firms and also workers are more and more willing to accept other means of payment. The Sardex local currency in Sardinia seems to be successful. Some firms are starting to accept being paid in bitcoins, which is highly volatile, may give you a high return, but also high losses, and so on. So why not accept a currency which is backed by the government? And finally, is this going to be a temporary measure or a permanent measure? Now, our view is that the euro system is not going to work, and it needs to be reformed. What has come out today is that we know how to reform the euro by introducing transfer, introducing a banking union, a fiscal union, and so on. But what also came out today is that there is no political willing to do that. So introducing a fiscal currency could be part of a project of institutional change at the Eurozone level to modify how the euro works, and Luca Fantacci will cover more on this, while having domestic currencies which are initially fiscal currencies, and they will evolve over time according to where the political will go. So if any project of reshaping the Eurozone in a feasible way is successful, the fiscal currency may disappear or may be converted into domestic currency which live alongside the euro. If, on the contrary, there is no will to change things, and as others before have said, a crisis emerges at one point, a country which has adopted the fiscal currency can switch to its currency immediately instead of risking the loss of the euro in the ATMs without any alternative. We think that this proposal should be supported not only by the periphery who want to reflate the economy and create jobs, but also from those who support the interests of the creditors in the core, because I know that the creditors in the German banks, in the French banks, are more and more worried that should Italy do something strange and maybe redenominate its public debt or private debt into a new currency which devalues, they will suffer losses. So since we have learned that the major way to make the debt sustainable is to increase income, as long as the fiscal currency is able to increase income of the Italians and of the other countries who adopt this proposal, it will make the debt sustainable and therefore should be supported not just by the periphery, but also from those at the core who are forward-looking. Will it work? Well, it will depend crucially on two things. One is the size of the multiplier. So if this fiscal currency gives rise to a large number of exchanges, so that, let's say, for 1,000 euro worth of fiscal currency, we generate 3,000 worth of exchanges, and the proportional increase in tax revenues, both in euro and fiscal currency, it will be effective. If the fiscal currency is just kept until maturity and then redeemed, the impact will be negligible. And the trust in this policy will be the key. So if the government comes out with a proposal for a fiscal currency because they are desperate in need for liquidity, nobody will trust this to work, and the possibility of failure will be high. If, on the contrary, the fiscal currency is proposed as a way to regain sovereignty and to put again the interests of the citizens first, then I don't see any reasons for it to fail. Thank you.